Recently, we have been playing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and Foundry VTT was one of the best ways to play it. The difficulty that I found was many people didn't know how to install Foundry VTT to run their own games. Right? So when I presented this to a friend, they wanted to run it off their own machines, and then behind AT&T, they had issues with port forwarding and all that. So I found this wonderful wiki item halfway through my process of automating this installation, semi-automating this installation. I found that there's a guide on the Foundry wiki that shows you how to install Foundry VTT on an Oracle cloud hosting, and we will only use the free tier, so we will not be charged anything. The problem was that there's a lot of steps to this. Not just setting up the VTT, but also once you set up the VTT, there's a lot of command prompt stuff that people have to do, check what's going on, what's not going on, is it working, not working, all that stuff. So I thought, why not automate this process for someone who is new? So I wrote a small shell script, which basically runs all those commands and asks you for a few questions as you're installing it so that it makes the installation process a little more easier. So we'll go through this in steps. There'll be timestamps down in the, so you can just click on the chapter that you want to see. So step one, we need to create an Oracle Cloud account. So head on to this account website. And to create this free account, you will need a few things. You will need a valid email account. You will need a credit or debit card. And you will need a valid phone number. So they want to make sure you don't have duplicates and that you're not a bot. My recommendation is to use a Gmail. Don't use your own domain name emails. This is what I tried to do the first time, but it took a very long time to verify. But something like Gmail verified very quickly. Credit cards, try multiple. Certain banks didn't work. So for example, Bank of America's card is way too secure. They thought I was stealing money from myself. But some other bank cards worked. So like Chase Bank worked. Okay. So I'm not going to show you this process because this is a lot of personal information has to be entered. It's a very simple GUI. You go through it. You enter your information, your address, your billing information and all that. There will be a small charge of a few cents that will be taken away again. So they just want to see if it is a valid card or not. Okay, so once you finish step one, step two is to get an instance running. And this I can show you because the process is not as simple. So once you have the account and is active, log into your account. There'll be a big box that will pop up saying, hey, how do you want to optimize this? You can just hit skip because we don't need any of that. What we need to do is create an instance. Either you click on this instances tab, which will be already pinned for you, or you can scroll down to create a VM instance. Both are the same. So let's click on create a VM instance. All right, so once you're here, you can name an instance. Foundry, because why not? Or Foundry VTT. Let's keep it normal. Placement, it really doesn't matter because there are 3 different domains in Phoenix. They can put you in any of them. It really doesn't matter. The shape and the image, now this is where it becomes important because I have optimized this script to run on Debian based. So I would highly recommend going with Ubuntu because that's what I've written the script in. Get the latest version, which is what is shown here. And then the shape. By default, this is not the shape that you'll have. So if you click on change shape, you probably have AMD and whatnot. Doesn't matter. Virtual machine is perfectly fine. Ampere based is what we want. So click on that. And by default, you will not have an option to change any of these. You just have to hit the checkbox. When you do, you'll get these options here. Since they're giving us 4 processors and 24 gigs for free per month, why not make this 2 processors and 12 gigs, half the resources? And that's pretty good. It works pretty well. And more number of processors you have, the higher your bandwidth, basically. Okay, so once we have that, we're good. We also don't have to worry about the subnet. I'll show you how to edit it, but you can edit it right here if you want to. The next step is very important. We need this private key. This is the only way we'll be able to connect to the server. You could upload your own private key if you want to create one using applications like Putty, or you can just go with no key. Not as safe. I would recommend getting a key pair. So in my case, I'm going to save this and save the public key because we'll need that. Now boot volume. By default, they give you 200 gigabytes free. But if you notice, this is only 50 gigabytes or so. So I'm going to change this to about half the resources just in case I want to set up a second VM or something. And that's plenty for me. Do I need to use any of this encryption data between volume and block volumes? Totally up to you. Again, not needed, right? Let me hit create. Now this is going to take a while for it to create, but we can do something else in the meanwhile. So first is provisioning. It's going to give us an IP address. Once it gives us the public IP address, we can move on to step 3. So this is real time, so you can see how long it actually takes to create these things and give you this information. So, okay, there we go. We have a public IP address. Again, each time you launch an instance, this address is different. So let's copy this over. So we have an instance running. Technically, it is provisioning, it's starting up, but it eventually will start running. So let's go get a domain. So you can either purchase a domain from a domain registrar, which you have to pay, or you can use a website like noip, duck DNS, something of that sort, and get dynamic DNS addresses for free. So we just need an IP address to point to that instance, to this IP address here, right? Sorry, we need a URL to point to this IP address. Now, as you can see, it's already running. It didn't take long. Okay, let's go to noip.com. Set up an account here. You need an email, and that's it. As long as you verify your email address, you will be able to log in. Once you're in, you can do a quick add, or you can just click on active tab here, or go to noip hostnames. Either way, you just need to create a hostname. So let's create a hostname. I need to create one so that I can give it to my players so they can connect to my Foundry VTT online. The easiest way, make something. So in this case, let's go ecovtt. And I want ddns.net. So it'll be ecovtt.ddns.net as my address. Now IP address. We want an IP address that points to our server. So I'm going to place the server's IP address down. Perfect. DNS hostname A is all we want because it's a record that points to the hostname to an IPv4 address, and that's all we really need. Create hostname. It'll have this thing here. It just means that there's no way of updating this in case your IP address changes. Again, we can set it up, but we don't need to. It's fine. It'll work without that. So currently we have this address, ecovtt.ddns.net, pointing to this IP. And the good thing about noip is it is very fast in telling the internet that, hey, that URL points to that IP. Whereas in other cloud providers, it can take anywhere up to 30 minutes for this to propagate. All right. So let's go back to this. So we have created a domain name. The next thing is we have to connect to our machine and get this file to run it. How do we do that? So to do that, the first thing we need to do is make sure that certain ports on this machine are open and that we can actually run Foundry from it pretty well. So if you notice, we scroll down here, we should have an option about the networking stuff here. So if I click on this subnet option here, it may be slightly different for me than yours, or it may not be. Let's take a look. And then we click on the default security lists. Yes, I already have these things added, but you will probably only see up to here. You'll see the SSH connection and then 2 more. So we can go to add ingress rules. CIDR, this is going to be 0.0.0.0.0/0. That's the way you specify it. And the ports we want to open, we want to open HTTP port, which is 80, and HTTPS port, which is 443. And give it a name if you want, add ingress rules. I'm not going to do that because I already done that here. In fact, I'm going to remove the 30,000, which is what Foundry uses by default. And I'll tell you why we don't need that. Because the way we are doing this, we will make sure all our players connect through HTTPS. So they don't even need the 30,000 port open. Okay, once we do this, let's try to connect to our server. The easiest way to connect to our server, again, is to go back to our IP address and use one of these keys. So let's do a smart thing and rename these keys to something that we can use, right? So if I open my downloads folder, which is where this key is, this is previous stuff, I don't need that. Let me rename this key. Let's call it Foundry VTT or Foundry -test.key, whatever. So we have renamed it. Of course, Windows being Windows is not refreshing properly. There we go. So Foundry -test.key, and that is plenty for us. So we will connect using this. All right. So I will use Windows Terminal to connect to it. You can use any terminal application that you like to use, PowerShell, command prompt. As long as you have SSH capabilities, you should be good. All Windows terminals, command prompts now have that by default, so nothing to worry about. Okay. So, so what if I don't have this? Well, look up a program called Putty, Putty. That has a very nice interface that can let you connect. It's also one of the oldest programs that I know of that runs SSH and stuff for Windows. Okay, so let's connect to this instance that we started running. The best way to do it is to use the key that we renamed. I also know that my key is not in the documents folder, it's in the downloads folder. Oops, I'm in the documents. So I need to go one back and then downloads. Okay, so now that I'm in the downloads folder, let's try to connect to this instance. So SSH-I using the key Foundry-test.key. The username is always Ubuntu on Oracle Cloud by default. Since we didn't log into the machine yet, it has to be Ubuntu. And here I can either enter the IP address and connect, or I can test if our DDNS, the dynamic DNS, actually worked. So let's try to connect to the URL that we recently created, ecovtt.ddns.net, and let's hit enter. It will ask you, hey, do you want to add this to your known hosts? I'm like, yes, I want to add it. Okay, we have added this, and now we are on our Linux machine, Ubuntu machine, and we have SSH'd into it. So we are on Oracle's machine right now. So at this point, we are technically good to go. Use this virtual private server for anything we want. But since we are looking at creating Foundry VTT, let's go back to the GitHub. So once we have the instance running, we have connected into it. Now we need to get this script. To get the script, all we have to do is run this command. Basically, it uses curl, grabs the raw format of the script and makes a file and names the file foundryoracle.sh. That's what this command is doing. So I copy this command, go back to my terminal, paste it. Now you may say, hey, you need to update your system and all that before you proceed. The answer is yes. The script does it for you. The first line on the script does an update and upgrade and all that stuff. Let's run it. It got the script. Now, what we have to do is go to the second line, which is make it executable by chmod using that. So do chmod a plus x and then the shell script. Okay, so now we have made the shell script executable. If I ls, you'll notice the color has changed to a greener color. It just shows that it's executable. Okay, let's run this. And this is where you'll save, I don't know, half an hour. You don't have to keep typing all these commands over and over again. So /foundryoracle.sh, run it. It's going to do an update. Then it'll do an upgrade. Then it'll do an auto clean and auto remove of all the software. So it does the entire process. During this process, it's going to ask, do you want to restart some services about 4 times? If it does, all you have to do is hit tab and hit the enter key to select the OK button. Hopefully by the time this one finishes its progress, one of those will pop up. And this is real time, so I have not cut out anything yet, so you can see how quickly it's doing its thing. So right now, all it's doing is updating the system to the latest versions. And then it upgrades the system. That is just the next way of saying an actual upgrade. Around now is when it'll ask you that. So new kernel available, restarting the system to load the new kernel. Okay, I will restart, but not right now. Right now, we'll continue with what we have. So in this case, we have to do a tab and hit OK. It's going to proceed with the script. Yes, I know. Again, tab, OK. I'm sure this new kernel came out yesterday or something because it wasn't there before. Yes, tab, OK. And now it's doing NodeJS stuff, if I understand correctly. It's installing PM2, I believe. Okay, now it's trying to do some service stuff. It's going to pop that thing again, I guess. Tab, okay. Now it's installing Caddy. It's going to pop the same thing again. Tab, okay. Hopefully this is the last time it pops it up. Now you see it says, please enter the Foundry VTT timed download URL for Node.js version. So for this, I need to log into my Foundry and get my timed URL. So let me do that. So if I go to Foundry, I'm already logged in. You need to log in. Once you log into your account, go to Purchased Licenses tab. And here we need the Node.js version. So Node.js or Linux version. This by default is already at the stable version, so we are good. Don't hit the download button. We want the timed URL button. So when you click on this, it's going to copy the URL and you will have 300 seconds to complete the next step, which is 5 minutes, plenty of time. So we just paste that URL here and proceed. It's going to download FoundryVTT.zip, basically renaming the file to FoundryVTT.zip, and then it'll unzip it and proceed with the installation. Keep in mind your server has a much higher bandwidth than what you're downloading currently, because this depends on how fast the server on Foundry's side, or in this case Amazon side, is actually sending the file. That's one of the other reasons why I want to set up an Oracle. I have players from India and I'm in the US right now. So having a connection that is pretty fast is definitely helpful. Okay, it's extracting. It is actually running Foundry right now. As you can see, it is online. So technically it is running right now. So let's enter the URL that we just created in the first step. Again, echo VTT is my URL. Don't use it. Make one for yourself. All right, so once you have this entered, it is going to set up Foundry at that address. It's going to restart the system, and restarting is very good because you actually need to do it for the new kernel and all that. So give it about 10-15 seconds and we'll connect again. Yeah, let's try connecting again. Hopefully it has started by now. So let's hit enter and see what happens. If it is not up, then it'll be like, oh, it can't connect. No, it just started, so we are good. So we are technically in. Foundry is running. But this is again a habit, and this is something you may need to do for maintenance anyway. Do an update and upgrade. I just did it, but just to be sure that everything is up to date, I'll do it again. It should say 0 because everything is all good to go. So this is good to go. Now, are we actually ready to go? Let's check it out. Let's go to ecovtt.ddns.net, and you will see that it's asking me for the license key because it's a newly installed Foundry tabletop. And this is encrypted. Connection is secure, so we are good. It's using Let's Encrypt in the background. Okay, so that's the step to install Foundry. At this point, you can play your games online perfectly fine. The next step is to make life a little bit more easier. Now, how do I transfer files from my machine or from my previous Foundry installation, whatever the case may be, onto this new machine? So for that, you will need software that I recommend is Cyberduck. You can use any SFTP style connection, secure, so SSH file transfer protocol. But I like Cyberduck. So let's start this up and we'll see how this works. So if I want to make a connection, I can just do open connection, or I can do a bookmark. So let's bookmark it, because why not? So the first thing we do is change this to SFTP. The server name, you don't need to use your IP address anymore because you have a dynamic DNS that points to that server. The username is Ubuntu. Luckily, this one doesn't have a password assigned because we are going to use a SSH private key to connect instead. So let me choose my key. So to do that, I go down to downloads, all keys, Foundry test is all we need. So I'm going to choose that. Did it not choose? Oh, it did. Okay, cool. It just took a second. All right, and you can look at more options. Honestly, we don't need anything else right now. This is good. Okay, so we technically are connected. So double click, allow is going to ask that each and every time you want to do with anything with a file. Now, this is the file we got, foundryoracle.sh. You can get rid of it if you want because now it's installed. All your campaigns and stuff go into Foundry user data. So you usually want to put stuff in the data, in the worlds folder, right? That's where you're going to upload stuff. So now you have access to the machine and you can upload stuff. You can just drag and drop them into the correct folder. It works like a file browser, right? You can click on update, you can hit refresh, you can do a lot of things, send files back and forth. Perfect. So this is what I recommend, Cyberduck, for doing the file transfers. Okay, hopefully this gave you a good idea of how to install Foundry VTT on Oracle server using a shell script instead of going through the wiki's list of commands, because that shell script basically is this. I got half the commands from here. Halfway through the list, when I hit caddy is where I started looking for a better way of doing the secure connection. I was going to use Nginx, but I didn't know about caddy, and that's when I found out that there's a thing called caddy from this wiki, and that's why I used it. So yeah, feel free to use the script, and may you have wonderful games running Foundry on Oracle.